The News 1226 First Alert Weather Hurricane Special, sponsored by Truth Roofing.
Welcome everyone to the 2024 First Alert Weather Team Hurricane Special. We're excited to look back at last year's impactful season, take a look at this year's current outlook, and we'll also take a look at how you can keep your family safe during what's expected to be a fairly impactful season once again. Now, this past season that we just had for 2023, it actually was the fourth most active season on record for us, and it was the most active season that we've had during an El Nino year. For the entire season, we had 20 named storms. 7 of those became hurricanes. 3 of those became major hurricanes. And the forecast, if you compare it to what NOAA and Colorado State put out, wasn't too bad. They did undershoot the total named storms just a tad, but as far as the amount of hurricanes, major hurricanes, they nailed that forecast. Now, looking ahead to last year as well, there was one big impactful system, and it was Idalia. Now, Idalia was one of the only landfalling U.S. hurricanes. It made landfall near Keaton Beach, Florida as a major Category 3. There was 7 to 12 feet of storm surge along the Florida Big Bend and widespread flooding further inland from torrential rain. 7 to 10 inches of rain fell in portions of southern Georgia, South Carolina, and far southeastern North Carolina. 12 tornadoes were also reported. One of those was in Florida, 4 in Georgia, 3 in South Carolina, and 4 in North Carolina. One of those tornadoes happened to hit Brunswick, Georgia. It was an EF1. It downed numerous trees and damaged buildings on the southwest side of the city. Now, in total, Idalia unfortunately did cause 12 fatalities, and most of the deaths were caused by rough surf and rip currents. The NOAA National Center for Environmental Information estimates the economic impact of Idalia is $3.6 billion. Idalia did bring some minor local impacts to the CS array. We had some top wind gusts around 40 miles per hour. That was confined mainly to our southern counties, but even a few downed trees can have a big impact. Let's hear from the National Hurricane Center.
We learn something from every storm. We're always focused on not just making the forecast better, but communicating the risk of the hazards better. We really want to keep focused on things like the rainfall flooding, especially for inland areas. It kills the most people in tropical storms and hurricanes in this country.
Now that we've looked back at last season, I know there's a lot of anticipation on what to expect for this year. Let's head on over to First Alert meteorologist Emily Acton for this year's outlook.
Thank you, Riley. Yes, we are definitely expecting a more active hurricane season this year, and that could be due to several things. Warmer sea surface temperature being one of them. We are also entering a La Nina weather pattern, and that's when we have those cooler sea surface temperatures off in the Pacific, and that leads to less shear and more activity here in the Atlantic Ocean. So again, we are getting ramped up for an active hurricane season, and we're at the start of the season, but we're not really going to feel those effects of this more active season more likely until August, whenever those sea surface temperatures again continue to warm up, and peak hurricane season is really throughout the month of September, and we still feel those effects throughout the month of October as well. And that's when we tend to see those major hurricanes, those stronger hurricanes, Category 3, 4, and 5. That typically comes again in those fall months, anywhere from August 1st to about November 1st. So an active season, again, will be several months away. But the National Hurricane Center has issued their outlook for this season, and the numbers are staggering. Average hurricanes, or named storms, for each season is around 14. This year, they're expecting anywhere from 17 to 25 named storms, so almost double what we typically see in a season. Hurricanes, we're expecting anywhere from 8 to 13. That's way more than the average of 7 per hurricane season. And major hurricanes, again, that's Category 3, 4, and 5. We're expecting anywhere from 4 to 7 of those hurricanes, again, for this upcoming season. So very active in the tropics. I hope that you're taking this special seriously and taking notes, because again, this is going to impact us sooner rather than later. We have several hurricane names. We have 21 to be exact. And after the 2020 season, where we went into the Greek alphabet, we actually have retired using the Greek alphabet, and we just have a secondary set of names. Once we go through all of these hurricane names, if we do, we'll go to a secondary list of names. But hey, we stopped in and spoke with the National Hurricane Center on their thoughts on the upcoming season, so let's take a look.
As we're seeing record warm ocean temperatures in the Atlantic, which tend to favor more activity, and then also a developing La Nina in the Pacific, which results in an atmospheric pattern that tends to favor Atlantic hurricane activity as well. So the combination of those two factors would suggest it'd probably be a busy season.
Well, it looks like all the ingredients are going to be there for another active season. Next, we're going to head down to Charleston. Our First Alert meteorologist, Mikkel Hannah Harding, got to tour with the hurricane hunters and check out their fleet. Take a look.
The 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, also known as the Hurricane Hunters, are a component of the 403rd Wing located at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. Today they stopped at Charleston International Airport, and this was their 4th stop on a week-long hurricane awareness tour up and down the eastern seaboard. I had the opportunity to walk through both their P-3 and C-130 aircrafts and learn more about the inner workings of the aircrafts along with the weather instruments and tools on board. I also spoke with Dr. Rick Knabb from the Weather Channel about his thoughts on an active hurricane season this year.
All the ingredients are there for a busy year, but in many ways, it doesn't matter how busy. It matters how bad. And one storm coming to Augusta makes it a bad year for you.
Michael Brennan, director of the National Hurricane Center, also had this to say about a common misconception about hurricanes.
It doesn't take a major hurricane for there to be major impacts, especially in inland areas. Again, the freshwater flooding from rainfall is such a big hazard, and it has almost nothing to do with how strong a storm is from a wind perspective.
One of the most fascinating and essential parts to forecasting tropical systems is the Hurricane Hunters aircrafts. We will take a look at one of the aircrafts used to fly into the storms. The WP-3D Orion, or P3 aircraft, as it is referred to by the Hurricane Hunters, main role is to fill in any gaps radar and satellite data may have when collecting low altitude data. The aircraft also has a radar built into the underside of the plane, allowing meteorologists to see the internal structure of a tropical system.
Thank you for that, Mikkel. Coming up next, we are going to hear more from Mikkel. He's actually going to be discussing the science behind how hurricanes form. Stick with us.
Welcome back, everyone. Another essential plane in the Hurricane Hunters fleet is the WC-130J Hercules. This aircraft is used in weather recon missions. This high-winged, medium-range aircraft is equipped to stay in the air for 18 hours and averages a cruise speed of 300 miles per hour. Each flight is staffed with 5 crew members that collect data every minute to relay back to the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida. These flights increase the center's accuracy in their forecast by 20%.
Well, thank you for that, Emily. Now we'll take a look at how these tropical systems actually form. So right here we just have a basin of water, which can symbolize the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, or the Gulf of Mexico. But typically, whenever we have a tropical system that develops, originally it starts off as a cluster of thunderstorms. Now that cluster can roll off the west coast of Africa as a tropical wave, or it can be just a disorganized area of thunderstorms in open waters, such as the Caribbean, off the east coast of the United States in the Atlantic, or the Gulf of Mexico, where sometimes we see these tropical systems somewhat spin up out of nowhere. So as far as looking at the conditions required to see tropical development, you need water temperatures typically at least at 80 degrees or higher. Going into this hurricane season, we're actually already seeing record high sea surface temperatures, which is one reason why this hurricane season is forecasted to be above average. You also need converging winds at the surface, just helping to lift all that warm and moist air above the ocean upward into the atmosphere, causing condensation, which releases latent heat, just further destabilizing the atmosphere and providing a rich environment for these storms to get going. You also need upper level winds that blow roughly in the same direction, so you don't want differences in wind direction as you're increasing altitude, because that pretty much rips these storms apart. Another cool thing about these tropical systems is that as they pass over warm ocean water, they almost act like a straw that sucks up liquid. It sucks up that warm energy from the surface of the ocean and leaves in its wake a cold pool of water or just cooler sea surface temperatures behind it. So these systems definitely feed off of moisture-rich and warm environments, warm sea surface temperatures. And in order for these tropical systems to continue going, they have to be moving into a favorable environment, which means low wind shear, not a lot of dry air, and also those sea surface temperatures that support tropical development. Now let's take a deeper look at the structure of hurricanes in general, and we're talking about how they're kind of broken down into quadrants. So when you look at a hurricane in general, some of the most destructive activity associated with these systems comes in that right front quadrant area. This is where you have the highest severe threat. You see some of the strongest winds, also the highest threats again for for severe weather, mainly tornadoes, just from the already spin of this system. A lot of shear and rotation in the atmosphere when these storms pass over, particularly in that right front quadrant. And you also see large flooding impacts, some of the heaviest, most intense rain. And also, when we're talking about coastal areas, you see that this is an area of low pressure. It has a counterclockwise spin. So that's pretty much pinwheeling water on land and on shore, increasing that surge threat. As you check out the other quadrants associated with hurricanes, you can see the right rear quadrant also packs a punch a lot lower in terms of that wind, surge, flood threat, and especially that tornadic threat, but still the second most dangerous portion of a hurricane. And as you look at the left rear, those threats continue to go down. And typically with that left front quadrant, you don't see as great of impacts with this system, but still definitely can see some impacts from a hurricane in general if you are in that left front quadrant. And overall, you definitely want to treat all hurricanes, no matter what part of the hurricane that's impacting you, with a serious manner. As far as looking at tropical frequency and when we typically see storms, or where we see storms developing and when, we're looking here at about June. So you can see a lot of storms have typically maybe developed closer towards the United States and the Gulf of Mexico, the Northern Caribbean, and off the east coast of the United States. Now, as we head later into the season, you can see development areas start to expand across the Atlantic basin, moving out into the open waters of the Atlantic, closer towards the west coast of Africa, kind of east of the Lesser Antilles, also favoring areas a little bit closer towards the Bahamas, the Gulf of Mexico. But you can see definitely off the east coast, we start to see more of those tropical systems spinning up right near the United States. As we head towards September, which typically the peak of the hurricane season is about mid-September, you can see that we start to see a lot of activity out here in the open waters of the Atlantic. And depending on where that Bermuda high sets up, it can sometimes fling these storms out into the open waters of the Atlantic or push them right towards the southeastern and southern United States. As we continue towards October and into November, activity does begin to wane and wind down. And of course, we do finish off the hurricane season right on November 30th. Now we'll hear from a member of the National Hurricane Center about the warning process and how that's changed over the years.
The good thing about hurricane forecasting is that we've gotten more accurate, and we've been able to get more accurate further out in time. So in the past, we've actually pushed the time that we put out watches and warnings out by about 12 hours. We haven't had any recent changes in that, but I could foresee a time where we get accurate enough where we might end up putting watches and warnings out at longer lead times at some point.
Whether a storm is called a tropical storm or a hurricane is based purely upon how fast the winds are. But did you know that according to NOAA, more than half of all hurricane-related deaths are caused by inland flooding? This is just one more reason we need to pay close attention in the CSRA anytime a tropical system is headed our way.
So hurricane warnings will go inland as far as we think there's a threat or risk of hurricane force winds going. In a state like South Carolina or Georgia, that could mean even as far inland as the central part of the state, potentially for some of the biggest and strongest hurricanes.
And that is exactly what happened in the Columbia area in 2015 as Hurricane Joaquin passed to the east, sending a conveyor belt of tropical moisture into South Carolina, dumping more than 20 inches of rain in the Columbia area. This 500-year flood caused 19 deaths, more than 1,500 water rescues, and 36 dam failures across the state. And if that plume of moisture had shifted another 50 to 70 miles west, what you see here would have happened right here in the CSRA.
Inland communities are not always out of harm's way, and I think that's important to note, that flooding, the rain, wind, even tornadoes can happen even further inland from coastal areas.
The good news is most flood-related deaths could be prevented by following these tips. Number 1, turn around, don't drown. It only takes about 1 foot of water to lift a vehicle and push it off the road into deeper water. So even if you think you can make it, just play it safe and turn around because the road underneath may not even be there. Number 2, stay away from flooded waterways and never attempt to walk through. If water can push a car off the road, it can knock you down. And finally, heed flood warnings when they are issued for your area and move to higher ground before the floods happen.
Coming up, Tim Strong has a look at what to include in your disaster kit and other ways to make sure you are prepared the next time a storm heads our way.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm First Alert meteorologist Tim Strong. We continue with our First Alert Hurricane Special, now focusing on preparedness for you and your family. Let's lead off talking about severe weather awareness. We do that a lot here, talking about what to do and where to go before a natural disaster or severe weather strikes here. Have a disaster plan. know how to put it into play, and well ahead of time, it's always a good idea to practice that so each individual in your household knows what to do and where to go. And make sure you have an emergency disaster kit. And we're going to go into detail a little bit more about some of the items that would be very helpful to have in that kit in case of an emergency. But make sure it's up to date and fresh as well. Also, a very good thing to have during severe weather events is a NOAA weather radio. Now, keep in mind, natural disasters happen, severe weather happens, a loss of electricity can happen as well. Make sure you've got fresh batteries in that, and it'll continue to give you updates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on current conditions and if severe weather strikes. Also, a very important thing, everybody's got tech, everybody's got a cell phone most likely. You can always download the Frist Alert Weather app. It's free for Apple and Android devices here. You can find things there, helpful impacts on weather alerts. It's got an interactive radar. There'll be hour-by-hour forecasts. Of course, we keep that up to date all the time. Frequent video updates as well are uploaded as there, and you can have access to our Frist Alert Live Eye Camera Network. You're able to submit pictures and videos in a safe environment. Keep in mind there, just search WRDW Frist Alert. You scan that QR code, it takes you right to where you can download that app, and it's free. Now let's focus a little bit more on what to put together and things that may be very important to keep you safe with a disaster supplies kit. Water, food, very necessary. But if you have multiple folks in your household, water 1 gallon per person per day. Not just maybe a couple of bottles of water. Think about how many individuals you have in your household. Food, several days supply of non-perishable food is a good thing to go ahead. A disaster kit, you can find those online. You can buy those at retail outlets here, but it's a very good thing to have food and water ready to go in a secure location. Also, a first aid kit, very, very important. Things to keep in mind. Flashlight, extra batteries, always extra batteries, AAA, AA's, C and D size batteries, depending on the type of device you might have. A cell phone, hopefully we don't lose a cell network, but it's always possible. And make sure you've got extra chargers as well. Now think about also maybe a small toolkit, because you never know if you need to maybe manually shut off some things that are in your home. Maybe some things like, again, electrical devices that may require a small tool. Manual can opener, going back to the fact, well, if you have non-perishable canned items, you lose electricity, you don't have any way of opening. So a manual can opener is definitely a must. Local map, knowing maybe the outlook of where you are. Maybe you're not in an area you know a lot about, but just keep in mind a paper map. Always go back to where you can find yourself if you do get lost. A whistle, I know it sounds funny, but in case you need help and you're able to alert somebody with, again, a whistle, being able to get help if you need it. Also duct tape and some plastic sheeting going along that if you need to cover and seal off areas of your home. Maybe a window has gotten knocked out. Maybe you've got a hole in your roof and it's still raining. If you're able to get up there, put some plastic sheeting over, you always know duct tape will come in handy. Here's a couple of other things to think about. You might not be on the top of your list, but things around the house to keep in mind in case of an emergency.
A move as simple as bracing your garage door or even temporarily bracing it before a storm can mean the difference between your roof staying on or not. You know, take your wedding album, you know, your keepsakes, your kids' stuff. Maybe there's a piece of art somebody made you when they were in kindergarten. You know, those stuff that you can't replace, have that ready to go.
Things to remember just in case there ever is that emergency when you need to get out quick. Our next topic has created quite the buzz over the last several years: artificial intelligence. This is actually changing the way that we do think about weather prediction. Our current weather models, they use a series of mathematical equations, whether it be composed of physics, chemistry, or thermodynamic equations. We compile all that data, and then it uses those equations to project forward in time what's expected to happen weather-wise. Now, AI is changing the way we think about that. They're using statistical models, so they're just accumulating all that data, whether it be current weather data or past weather observations, and then they're trying to recognize patterns inside that data. So once we get to a current situation, it can say, okay, based on these current scenarios, this is what happened last time, this is what I'm going to think happening this time. So kind of a little bit different way to think about it, instead of just using a lot of different mathematical equations, trying to model the exact atmosphere, which is very tough to do. But we did talk to the director of the National Hurricane Center and the Weather Prediction Center to get their takes on what they think artificial intelligence could bring.
AI is really developing field within meteorology in general. Right now, we're starting to see some AI models that have some skill in forecasting track. So that may be that's something we're going to start exploring this year. Eventually down the road, there may be some benefits in forecasting intensity, but even also analyzing data.
But I will say this, I really think the human plays an essential role in the forecast process. And so, you know, we certainly got to keep an eye on the AI. It should help and assist the human forecaster in making the very best, most accurate forecast for you and your family.
Well, that wraps up our 2024 hurricane season special. This is looking like an active season, and we'll be right here in the Weather Center tracking every storm and keeping your family safe. Remember, we are always streaming our 24/7 Weather Channel on our website and your favorite streaming devices. Whenever you're on the go, you can always use the WRDW First Alert Weather app to always have a way to receive alerts from the First Alert Weather Team. Stay safe and good night.